So today we are going to continue our discussion on factoring that we started yesterday. Yesterday, if you remember, we talked about what it means to factor. Factor basically means to write as a product or a multiplication problem. So we want to take something that's been simplified, and write it so that it's written as something times something else. Yesterday we did that by pulling out a greatest common factor. That was kind of the top half of this page. And that was really like reversing the distributive property. We called it undistributing, okay? Today what we're going to be doing is the same idea. We still want to be writing as a product, but this time the product is going to end up looking like a FOIL problem. It's going to be like a parenthesis and a parenthesis, okay? So this factoring trinomials business, this is what I like to call unfoiling, just to be as technical as possible here. Okay, we are unfoiling. Okay, and by the way, you won't know what this a equals 1 thing means until we do ones where a doesn't equal 1, and that'll come tomorrow. So don't worry about that for right now. So before we get started, let's just remember what it means to multiply using FOIL. Okay, so the type of problem I'm talking about is one that maybe looks like this: x plus 4 and x plus 3, we'll say. Okay. And so when we multiply those two things together, we go x times x is x squared, and then we have 3x, and then we have 4x, and then we get 12, and then when I simplify that, I end up with x squared plus 7x plus 12. Okay? So today, and I'm going to zoom that out just a little bit because I realize my hand looks gigantic under that camera. Today what our goal is to take something that looks like this and turn it back into something that looks like that. Okay, and that's what I mean when I say unfoil, is we're taking this back apart into the two pieces it started as. Okay, so to do that, we really want to focus on these two numbers here because this is what will be given, and we want to figure out how do we get these numbers back from these. Okay. And so the relationship that I hope you're noticing is that these two numbers can be used to make a 7 and make a 12. They multiply to make this 12. That's in that last step of FOIL that we did, the last piece. 4 times 3 is 12. And they add to make this number in the middle, okay, because you end up with one of each. You end up with a 3x and a 4x, and then combining like terms, they make a 7. They add together. Okay, so when you're looking at a problem like this, the two numbers that you're trying to come up with are always going to multiply to make this number on the end and add to make this number in the middle. Okay, so it gets to be kind of brain teasery. Okay, so when I look at this first one, x squared plus 5x plus 6, I'm going to set myself up like this, x and x. And I am looking for numbers that multiply to make 6 and add to make 5. Okay, and usually I start by thinking about this number. So what multiplies to make 6? Well, 2 and 3 would work, and those also add to make 5 in the middle. So if I FOILed that back together, I'd be back at x squared plus 5x plus 6. Okay, that's it. So then for this next one, now we're going to talk about this negative sign, but we start out the same way. So we know it's going to be x and x. Okay. I want to multiply to make 32 and add to make 18. Now, that might be a tougher one to come up with off the top of your head. We had a pretty limited number of ways to make 6, right? But for 32, there's a few more options. So anytime you're stuck on one of these, I recommend that you go off to the side and make a list of all of the ways you can multiply to make that number. So ways to multiply to make 32. Start with 1. There's 1 and 32, and then go to 2 and 16. 3 doesn't work, but 4 works. 4 and 8. 5 doesn't work. 6 doesn't work. 7 doesn't work. And then 8 is already on my list. So this is all the ways to multiply to make 32. And then I need the combination that's also going to make the 18. So that's the 2 and the 16. Okay. Now, the question is, how do I multiply to get a positive number, but add to get a negative number? Okay. The way I'm going to do that is with two negatives. So I'm going to make this x minus 2 and x minus 16. Because when I multiply two negatives, I get my positive back. But when I add those two negatives, I get a negative here. So anytime this here is positive, okay, anytime this number here is positive, you know that your two factors are going to have the same sign. They're either going to be two pluses, like they were up here, or they're going to be two minuses, like they were here. But the fact that this is positive means you're going to have matches, okay? So then, of course, that begs the question, what happens when that's negative, okay? It's going to work the same way, except this time, when this is negative, we know that our signs are going to be different, because that's the only way to multiply to get a negative. You need one plus and one minus. And that means we have to be a little more careful in choosing our numbers. So I'm still looking for something that multiplies to make 36. I am still looking for something that adds to make 5. But when I think about that addition piece, I need to remember that one of my two numbers will be negative. Okay? So let's think of all the ways there are to multiply to 36. 1 and 36. By the way, you might not need to do this. And definitely you won't need to do it for every single problem. Okay? I just like to be able to see all my options out in front of me. But sometimes they're going to come to you a lot quicker. In fact, I hope a lot of the times they come to you quicker. So let's see. There's all of my, and then 5 doesn't work, and then 6 and 6. And then because 6 ended up on the list twice, I don't have to keep going. That's it. So now, how could I possibly make a 5? Well, none of these add to 5 by themselves. But if you think about the 9 and the 4, if I make the 4 negative, right? Then 9 and negative 4 make positive 5, which is what I wanted to have here. So I'm going to have x minus 4 and x plus 9. So when you're doing these ones, you do need to make sure that your plus and minus are in the right spot to make that number work out correctly in the middle. Okay? Okay, this next one throws people off all the time. So start with x and x. This is negative, so I know I'm going to have one plus and one minus. And then I'm looking for numbers that multiply to 42 but add to make a negative 1. And for some reason in this situation, people always want to do like 1 times whatever the number is. But that's not going to add to make 1. Okay? Really what we're looking is two things that multiply to 42 that are just one number apart, and that would be 7 and 6. And then I want to make sure that the 1 works out to be negative, so that would be with a negative 7 and a positive 6. Okay? Again, I could double check this by foiling. I can multiply these back together and make sure this all works out. But really it's this middle piece that you want to make sure of, because the x and x are always going to make x squared, and you chose these numbers specifically because they multiply to make 42, so it's really just that middle piece that you need to double check. Okay? All right, let's try that last one. In fact, why don't you take a second and see if you can get the last one on your own while I play with my camera. Okay, so sign-wise, we know that they have to match, right? Because this is positive. This is telling me that they both have to be negatives. So I need two numbers that multiply to 24 and add to make 10. Did you come up with 6 and 4? I hope you did. Okay, x minus 6, x minus 4. I want to show you something, though, along with that last example. This is correct, by the way, because you end up with a negative 4x and a negative 6x, which makes a negative 10x. If this problem had looked like this, x squared minus 10x minus 24, all I did was change this to a negative sign. That's going to change my answer completely, okay? Because now, with this negative sign here, I need two different signs. I need one plus and one minus to make a negative 24, okay? And so if I'm using one plus and one minus, 6 and 4 aren't going to work for me anymore, because 6 minus 4 would give me a 2 in the middle, okay? So now I'm looking for a completely different set of numbers. And I believe this one actually works out. And I know that you could figure this out if you had the time to think about it. But 2 and 12, because those multiply to 24. But then if you add them together, you have 2x minus 12x, and that's going to give me my negative 10x. So the signs really do matter quite a bit, because just the change from positive to negative here made it so that I was working with a completely different set of numbers. Okay, so please just be careful about that. Please make sure that you're thinking about the positives and negatives and making sure the middle term works out correctly. But other than that, as long as you know your multiplication tables, this lesson really shouldn't be too bad. Okay, so your homework is in your packet. It is the next page, the factoring trinomials page. I do want you to do the whole thing, and we will go over this tomorrow.